Sign these papers right now, Lauren, or I swear I'll make sure your daughter never speaks to you again. Lucas, my son-in-law, slammed the legal documents across my kitchen table so hard that my coffee cup rattled. His face was red with fury, and for the first time, I saw the real man behind the charming mask he'd worn for months. I was trembling with rage as I stared at the conservatorship petition in front of me. This man, this predator, who had married my daughter, was trying to have me declared mentally incompetent so he could control my finances. "You're old, Lauren. You can't take care of yourself anymore," he sneered. "Abigail and I are just trying to help you." What Lucas didn't know was that I had $73 million sitting in accounts he would never touch. And what he was holding wasn't just any document, it was something that would destroy him completely. If you want to know how I destroyed a professional con artist who tried to steal my family's fortune, make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Let me take you back to where this all began. My name is Lauren Alex. 43 years ago, I was a 22-year-old nursing student working my way through college when I met the love of my life. David Harrison walked into the hospital where I was doing my clinical rotations, and I thought he was just another resident. He was kind, gentle, and treated every patient like they mattered. What I didn't know is that he came from one of the wealthiest families in the state. David's family owned Harrison Industries, a massive corporation that was built over 3 generations. But David was different. He was the black sheep who wanted to save lives instead of counting money. When he told me about his family's wealth, I was shocked. Here I was, a girl from a working-class family, falling in love with someone whose parents lived in mansions and drove luxury cars. When David brought me home to meet his parents, the reception was ice cold. His mother looked at me like I was something she'd stepped in. His father barely acknowledged my existence. After dinner, I heard them arguing with David behind closed doors. "You chose a nobody," his mother said. "Some little nursing student with no family money, no connections, no class. Don't expect a penny from us if you marry her." David came out of that room with tears in his eyes, but his decision was made. "I'd rather have you and nothing than everything without you," he told me that night. And that's exactly what happened. His parents cut him off completely. No trust fund, no family support, no safety net. We were on our own. So we built our life from scratch. I worked double shifts at the hospital while David completed his residency. We lived in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment that barely had enough space for a kitchen table. Our dinners were ramen noodles and whatever leftovers I could bring home from the hospital cafeteria. But we were happy. We had each other, and we had dreams of the family we wanted to build. When Abigail was born, I made the hardest decision of my life. I quit nursing to raise her. David's residency salary wasn't much, but we made it work. Money was always tight. I clipped coupons, shopped at thrift stores, and made every dollar stretch as far as it could go. David's medical practice grew slowly, and after years of struggle, we finally saved enough to buy a small house in the suburbs. It wasn't much, but it was ours. For 20 years, David's family pretended we didn't exist. No Christmas cards, no birthday calls for Abigail, nothing. They never met their granddaughter. They never acknowledged that we existed. I watched David's pain every holiday season when other families were celebrating together. "They made their choice," he would say quietly. "We're not part of their world, and maybe that's for the best." Then, 2 years ago, everything changed in a way I never could have imagined. David's father had a massive heart attack. I remember the phone call like it was yesterday. We were having dinner when the hospital called. After 20 years of complete silence, after 2 decades of pretending we didn't exist, the old man was dying, and he was asking for David. I'll never forget the look on David's face when he hung up that phone. He was white as a sheet, just staring at the wall like he couldn't process what he'd just heard. "He wants to see me," David whispered, his voice barely audible. "After all these years of treating me like I'm dead to him, he wants to see me." I could hear the mix of pain and hope in his voice. Part of him had never stopped wanting his father's approval, even after decades of cruel rejection. David drove to the hospital alone that night. I begged him to let me come with him, but he said this was something he had to face by himself. I waited at home for what felt like an eternity, pacing the kitchen, cleaning the same counters over and over, wondering what could possibly be happening between father and son after 20 years of silence. When David finally came back at 3 in the morning, he looked like he'd aged 10 years in one night. He sat at our kitchen table and just stared at his hands. His father was drowning in regret, David told me. The old man spent his entire life building a business empire, accumulating wealth and power, but he had no one left to leave it to. No one cared about him. No one who would even visit him in his final hours. You see, David's younger brother Michael died in a car accident 5 years earlier. I didn't even know about it because the family never told us. We found out that night that Michael had been the golden child, the one groomed to take over Harrison Industries. David's parents put all their hopes and dreams in the younger son, the one who embraced the family business and lived the wealthy lifestyle they wanted. But Michael was gone, and David was the only Harrison left. The empire needed an heir, and suddenly the son they discarded was the only option. I was wrong, his father whispered from his hospital bed, oxygen mask covering most of his face. I was wrong about you, about Lauren, about everything that mattered. You were a good son all along. You chose love over money, compassion over greed, and I punished you for having the character I should have admired. David said his father cried as he spoke, tears rolling down his weathered cheeks. You built a real life, the old man continued. You saved lives as a doctor. You married for love. You raised a daughter with values. I built companies, but you built a family. I accumulated wealth, but you accumulated something far more precious. Those were some of the last coherent words the old man spoke before he slipped into a coma that would last until his death a week later. When David's father died, we discovered the shocking truth about Harrison Industries. It wasn't just successful. It was a global powerhouse that expanded far beyond what we'd ever imagined. The company had tentacles in real estate development, technology startups, international manufacturing, offshore investments, and luxury properties across 3 continents. David inherited everything. Every share of stock, every property deed, every investment account, every business partnership. The lawyers presented us with documents that made my head spin. $73 million. In one day, we went from a middle-class family carefully managing a doctor's salary to one of the wealthiest families in the entire state. I was completely overwhelmed. I didn't know how to process such an incredible change in our circumstances. For 40 years, I lived modestly, counted every penny, clipped coupons, and made countless small sacrifices. Now we had more money than I could ever imagine spending in 10 lifetimes. But David made me promise something that seemed crazy at the time, but would turn out to save our family from complete destruction. We don't tell anyone about this inheritance, he said firmly. Not yet. Not even Abigail. We keep living exactly as we have been. I thought he'd lost his mind. Why keep such incredible, life-changing news a secret? Why not celebrate? Why not finally enjoy the financial security we'd never had? But David was wiser than I realized. I want to see who people really are before money changes everything, he explained. I've seen what wealth does to families, Lauren. I've seen how it corrupts relationships, destroys trust, and brings out the worst in people. Let's wait and watch. Let's see how people treat us when they think we have nothing. Little did I know that this decision would save our family from a predator who was already circling, planning to destroy us from the inside. 6 months later, my world collapsed in the most devastating way imaginable. David died suddenly of a brain aneurysm on a Tuesday morning in March. One moment he was sitting at our kitchen table, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper, complaining about the local sports team's performance. And by evening, he was gone forever. Just like that. Without warning, without goodbye. The love of my life, my partner through 4 decades of struggle and triumph, was taken from me. I was devastated beyond words. The grief felt like a physical weight crushing my chest every morning when I woke up and remembered he was really gone. But even in my overwhelming sorrow, even through the fog of funeral arrangements and sympathy cards, I kept the promise David had made me swear to uphold. I continued living in our same modest 3-bedroom house, driving the same 10-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door, shopping at the same discount grocery stores where I'd always hunted for bargains. I told everyone who asked that I was surviving on David's life insurance policy and Social Security benefits. I complained about money being tight, worried out loud about rising utility bills, and mentioned having to be careful with my spending. Even Abigail didn't know the truth about our massive inheritance. As far as my own daughter knew, her mother was just another struggling widow trying to make ends meet on a fixed income. The grief was overwhelming, but I forced myself to maintain the careful facade that David had insisted upon. I clipped coupons from the Sunday paper, complained about rising grocery prices at the checkout line, and worried publicly about making my mortgage payments. It was actually harder than I expected, pretending to be poor when I had millions of dollars sitting in accounts that nobody knew existed. Every time I had to act worried about a $50 electric bill when I could have bought the entire power company, I felt the weight of David's wisdom. That's when Lucas entered our lives like a predator who had sensed vulnerability from miles away. He was everything that should have made me immediately suspicious. But Abigail was grieving her father and vulnerable to someone who seemed strong and successful. Lucas was charming in that practiced way that comes from years of manipulation, handsome in an obvious way that suggested he spent serious money on his appearance, well-dressed to the point of being flashy, and 10 years younger than my 35-year-old daughter. Lucas claimed to be a financial advisor who specialized in helping families manage their wealth and plan for secure futures. He had business cards with impressive titles, spoke confidently about investment strategies, and carried himself like a man who understood money better than anyone else in the room. But something about his story never quite added up, in my mind. Lucas drove a brand new BMW that probably cost more than most people made in a year, wore expensive Italian suits that I recognized from magazine advertisements, and always seemed to have unlimited money for elaborate dates with Abigail. He took her to 5-star restaurants where dinner for 2 cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. Weekend getaways at luxury resorts in the mountains, Broadway shows in the city with premium seats, and shopping trips where he'd encourage her to buy whatever caught her eye. Abigail was completely swept off her feet by his apparent success and endless generosity. She'd come home from their dates glowing with excitement, telling me about the expensive wine he ordered, the designer dress he bought her, the vacation he was planning for them. "He's so successful, Mom," she said with stars in her eyes. "He really knows how to treat a woman right." But I started noticing red flags almost immediately. Little things that made my nursing instincts kick in. Lucas had a way of steering conversations toward money that made my skin crawl. He would ask casual questions about our family finances that seemed innocent on the surface, but felt invasive and calculated to me. "So how's your mom really doing financially since your dad passed?" he asked Abigail when he thought I wasn't listening from the kitchen. "Is she managing okay on her own? Does she need any help with bills?" He would make what he called jokes about Abigail being an only child who would probably inherit everything someday. "You're so lucky," he told her with a laugh that never reached his eyes. "No siblings to fight over the family fortune when your mom passes away." But his eyes weren't laughing when he said these things. They were calculating, measuring, evaluating what he thought might be available for the taking. Lucas constantly fished for information about David's medical practice, with questions that seemed caring but felt like an interrogation. He wanted to know how successful the practice was, whether David invested wisely over the years, if he'd left us comfortable financially, whether there were any assets I might not be managing properly. When I gave deliberately vague answers about getting by on insurance money and being careful with expenses, I could see frustration flash across his handsome face before he quickly covered it with that practiced, sympathetic smile. What really bothered me was how Lucas got visibly irritated whenever Abigail wanted to spend time with me alone. If she suggested having lunch with just her mother, or if she wanted to help me with something around the house, or if she mentioned wanting to have a girls' day shopping, Lucas would find ways to insert himself into our plans. "I should come too," he'd say with forced enthusiasm. "I want to get to know Lauren better. We're going to be family soon." But I could tell he wasn't interested in bonding with his future mother-in-law. He was gathering intelligence, studying me, looking for weaknesses he could exploit later. Lucas made subtle but cutting comments about my shabby house that he disguised as concern for my well-being. "This place is pretty old, isn't it?" he'd say while looking around my living room with barely concealed disdain. "The maintenance must be getting expensive for someone on a fixed income. Have you thought about what you'll do when major repairs are needed?" He suggested more than once that I should consider downsizing to a senior community where I'd have less responsibility and more social opportunities with people your own age. But what really set off every alarm bell I had was how Lucas constantly steered conversations toward my age and whether I was managing okay mentally and physically. He would ask pointed questions about whether I remembered to take my medications correctly, if I ever got confused about appointments or important dates, whether I felt safe living alone in such a big house, if I ever had trouble managing my finances or paying bills on time. "It's so hard for elderly people to handle all the details of modern life," he'd say with fake sympathy. "There's no shame in needing help." I started watching Lucas more carefully, using skills I developed during decades of nursing, where reading people could mean the difference between life and death. What I saw chilled me to the bone. This wasn't a man genuinely in love with my daughter. This was a predator identified what he thought was a vulnerable family situation and was systematically positioning himself to take advantage of it. He was building a case, documenting what he saw as my weaknesses and vulnerabilities, and preparing for something that would devastate my family. David's wisdom in keeping our inheritance secret was already proving itself more valuable than gold. Lucas had no idea that the poor widow he was so carefully manipulating had $73 million that he would never, ever be able to touch. When Lucas and Abigail announced their engagement 6 months after they started dating, I felt a chill run down my spine. But what happened next confirmed every suspicion I'd been harboring. Lucas immediately insisted on having a big wedding, the kind of elaborate celebration that would cost a fortune. "Abigail deserves the best," he declared with that charming smile that never reached his eyes. "I'll handle everything. Money is no object when it comes to the woman I love." I watched in horror as Lucas spent nearly $60,000 on this wedding. $60,000 that Abigail didn't have. When I quietly asked her how they were paying for such an expensive celebration, she brushed off my concerns. "Lucas is handling the finances," she said. "He knows what he's doing. He says it's an investment in our future, and I should trust him." An investment in their future. Those words made my stomach turn, because I could see exactly what kind of investment Lucas was really making. He was investing in creating debt, in making Abigail financially dependent on him, in positioning himself as the financially savvy partner who could handle money better than she could. The wedding itself was absolutely beautiful. Lucas spared no expense. There were white roses everywhere, a 7-piece orchestra, premium champagne, and a 5-course dinner that probably cost more per plate than most people spend on groceries in a week. Abigail looked radiant in her designer wedding dress, and every guest commented on how magical and expensive everything looked. But I felt sick the entire time. While everyone else was celebrating, I was watching Lucas work the room, charming Abigail's friends, making connections, gathering information about our family and our finances. He introduced himself to everyone as a successful financial advisor, dropping hints about his expertise in managing family wealth and helping widows navigate complex financial situations. Then I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. During the reception, I was getting some air near the terrace when I heard Lucas talking to his friend Derek, a man I'd never met before who seemed to know an awful lot about Lucas's business dealings. They didn't see me standing behind the decorative plants, and their conversation revealed everything I needed to know about Lucas's true intentions. Phase 1 is complete, Lucas said with satisfaction, looking out at the wedding reception where my daughter was dancing with her friends. Now we move to Phase 2. Derek asked what that meant, and Lucas smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. The old lady won't know what hit her, he said with cold confidence. I've been documenting everything. Her memory lapses, her confusion about money, the way she gets overwhelmed by simple decisions. It's going to be easier than I thought. I heard enough. This man married my daughter as part of some calculated plan to target me, and now I knew for certain that every instinct I'd had about him was correct. But when I tried to warn Abigail, she completely shut me down. You're being ridiculous, Mom, she said when I pulled her aside at her own wedding reception. You're jealous because you can't stand that I'm happy. You've been alone since Dad died, and now you can't handle that. I found someone who loves me. Her words stung, but what hurt even more was seeing how completely Lucas had manipulated her perception of the situation. Lucas loves me, and he's trying to include you in our lives, Abigail continued, her voice rising with frustration. He asks about you all the time. He wants to help you with your finances. He's concerned about you living alone. He's being a good son-in-law, and you're treating him like he's some kind of criminal. I wanted to tell her what I'd overheard, but I knew she wouldn't believe me. Lucas had done his work too well. He'd positioned himself as the caring, successful husband, while making me look like a paranoid, jealous mother who couldn't accept her daughter's happiness. But I knew better. After 40 years of nursing, I learned to recognize predators. I'd seen how they operated in hospitals, targeting vulnerable patients and families. I'd watched them charm their way into people's lives, gain their trust, and then strike when their victims were most defenseless. Lucas was following the same playbook. And if you've ever wondered how professional con artists choose their targets, make sure to subscribe, because what I discovered about Lucas's past will shock you. The wedding reception continued around us, but I spent the rest of the evening watching Lucas more carefully than ever. Have you ever had a gut feeling about someone that everyone else dismissed as paranoia? If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you listen to your guts or ignore it? Let me know in the comments. 3 weeks after the wedding, Lucas showed up at my door with a manila folder full of legal papers. That's when I knew the real game was beginning. He walked into my kitchen like he owned the place, spread documents across my table, and said with fake concern, "This is for your own good, Lauren." What he pulled out of that folder made my heart race. Lucas had done his homework thoroughly. He had documentation of what he called my concerning behavior, times I'd supposedly forgotten appointments, instances where I'd seemed confused about finances, even photographs of my house that he'd taken without my knowledge, claiming it looked cluttered and unsafe for an elderly person. Abigail and I have been talking, he said with that practiced sympathy I'd learned to hate. We think you need help managing your affairs. You're getting older, and we've noticed some troubling signs. This conservatorship will protect you from making big financial mistakes that could hurt your future. I stared at those papers and realized this had been his plan all along. Every conversation, every visit, every seemingly innocent question about my finances, it all has been building to this moment. Lucas married my daughter to establish himself as family, to gain access to what he thought were my assets, and now he was moving to take complete control. He was counting on me having more money than I'd revealed. Maybe some life insurance money David had left behind, maybe some savings from his medical practice, maybe property or investments that a confused old widow wouldn't know how to manage properly. Lucas had no idea how right he was about me having money. He just had no clue how much. But what Lucas didn't know was that David had taught me to be deeply suspicious of anyone who asked too many questions about money. People who really care about you never push for financial information, David had warned me years ago. The ones who keep asking are the ones you need to watch. So, I kept recording our conversations for weeks. Every time Lucas came over and pressured me to sign financial documents, every time he tried to get himself named as a beneficiary on accounts, every time he pushed me to sell my house and move in with them, I had it all on tape. Lucas thought he was manipulating a helpless old woman, but I was building a case against him. "Sign these papers, Lauren," he said, his voice taking on a harder edge when I hesitated. "Abigail agrees this is what's best for you. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." That's when I realized just how deep his manipulation went. He convinced my own daughter that I was incompetent, that I needed someone else to control my life and my money. The trap was closing, and Lucas thought he had me exactly where he wanted me. "You want to know about my finances, Lucas?" I said, looking him straight in the eye. "Let me show you exactly what kind of financial situation you're trying to control." I pulled out my phone and played the recording from their wedding reception. The audio was crystal clear. His own voice filled my kitchen. "Phase 1 is complete. Now we move to phase 2. The old lady won't know what hit her." I watched his face go completely white as he heard his own words. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Where did you get that?" he stammered, but I wasn't finished with him yet. Then I showed him the bank statements. All of them. Account after account, investment portfolio after investment portfolio. $73 million spread across multiple accounts. His jaw literally dropped as he stared at the numbers, his eyes growing wider with each page I placed in front of him. "I've been poor and I've been rich, Lucas," I said calmly while he sat there in shock. "I know the difference between someone who loves you and someone who loves your money. David was right to make me promise to keep this secret. It showed me exactly who you are." But I still wasn't done destroying him. I pulled out the thick investigation report from the private detective I hired weeks ago. Lucas wasn't just a financial advisor trying to help families manage their wealth. He was a professional con artist who specialized in marrying into families and taking control of their assets. "Abigail wasn't your first victim, was she?" I asked, flipping through pages of documented evidence. "There was Jennifer Morrison in Ohio 2 years ago. You married her, convinced her elderly father to sign over his farm, then disappeared when the money was gone. And before that, Rebecca Chen in California. Same pattern: marriage, manipulation, financial control, then abandonment." The report contained everything: court documents, police reports, testimonies from his previous victims. Lucas had been running the same scam for years, targeting women with elderly parents or family money. He would charm his way into their lives, establish himself as family, then systematically take control of whatever assets he could access. "You thought you found the perfect mark," I continued, watching him squirm in his chair. "A grieving widow living alone, a daughter who trusted you completely, and what you assumed was a modest inheritance from a small-town doctor. You had no idea you'd walked into a trap set by someone with 73 million reasons to be very, very careful about who she trusts." Lucas tried to speak, tried to deny everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. His entire criminal pattern was laid out in black and white, and now he knew that I was watching him from the very beginning. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Abigail was standing in the hallway, listening to everything. She walked into the kitchen with tears streaming down her face, her hand covering her mouth in shock. I could see the exact moment when the truth hit her, when she understood what Lucas had really been doing to our family. Her face crumpled as she heard the recordings of Lucas plotting against me. She saw the bank statements showing the $73 million he'd been hunting for. She read the investigation report documenting his other victims. Women just like her who had been used as pawns in his sick game. "You married me to get my mother's money?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Everything between us was a lie?" Lucas tried desperately to lie his way out of it. He reached for her, tried to use that same charming voice that had fooled her for months. "Baby, you don't understand. Your mother is confused. She's making this up. Those recordings are fake. I love you, Abigail. We can work through this." But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings were real, the bank statements were genuine, and the investigation report contained court documents that couldn't be faked. There was no talking his way out of what he'd done. Abigail looked at the photographs of his other victims: Jennifer Morrison, who'd lost her father's farm, and Rebecca Chen, whose family had been destroyed by Lucas's manipulation. She saw their testimonies describing the exact same pattern of behavior she'd experienced. The elaborate dates, the expensive wedding, the subtle questions about family finances, the attempts to isolate her from me. "He did this to other families," she said, her voice hollow with realization. "He destroyed other people's lives, and I helped him do it to us." Abigail collapsed into my arms, sobbing like her heart was breaking. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have seen what he was doing. He made me think you were jealous, that you couldn't handle my happiness. I defended him against my own mother." I held her while she cried, feeling my heart break for the pain he'd caused her. "You couldn't have known," I whispered. "He's a professional. This is what he does for a living." Within a week, Lucas was gone from our lives completely. Abigail had the marriage annulled, which was surprisingly easy to do once the court saw the evidence of fraud and deception. The police opened an investigation into his activities, and when news of his arrest spread, his other victims came forward with their own stories. Lucas was facing serious criminal charges in multiple states: wire fraud, elder abuse, identity theft, and marriage fraud. The evidence I'd gathered became the foundation for a federal case that would put him away for years. The man who thought he was hunting a helpless old woman had walked straight into a trap that would destroy him completely. 6 months later, Abigail and I were closer than we'd ever been in our entire lives. The nightmare with Lucas had torn us apart temporarily, but ultimately, it brought us together in a way that nothing else could have. We'd survived a predator's attack on our family, and we'd done it together. We were finally using David's inheritance the way he would have wanted us to. The money that had been sitting secretly in accounts for 2 years was now making a real difference in the world. Abigail went back to school to become a teacher, which had always been her dream job before Lucas convinced her she needed to focus on more practical career choices that would bring in immediate income. "I forgot how much I loved working with kids," she told me as she studied for her education courses. "Lucas made me think that dreams were stupid, that only money mattered. But you and Dad taught me that helping others is what really matters." We also started a foundation to help other families recognize and escape financial predators like Lucas. We called it the David Harrison Foundation for Financial Safety, and it provided resources, education, and legal support for families who found themselves targeted by con artists. The foundation funded background check services, legal consultations, and counseling for victims who'd been manipulated by people they trusted. Through our work with the foundation, I learned that Lucas's tactics weren't unique. There were hundreds of predators out there using the same playbook, targeting vulnerable families, using marriage as a weapon, and systematically stealing everything their victims had worked for. But I also learned that most of these crimes could be prevented with education and awareness. The most important lesson I learned from this entire experience was that wealth doesn't change who you are, it reveals who you are. Lucas thought money would make him powerful and successful, but it only revealed that he was a coward who preyed on innocent people, David had money but remained kind and generous. I had money but stayed grounded in the values we'd built our life on. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is keep quiet and let people show you their true nature. If I had revealed our inheritance immediately after David's death, Lucas might have changed his strategy. He might have been more careful, more subtle, harder to catch. But by staying silent, I gave him enough rope to hang himself. Lucas thought he was hunting a helpless old woman who didn't understand money or legal documents. He had no idea he was walking into a trap set by someone who'd learned to be very, very careful about who she trusted. He underestimated a woman who'd spent 40 years learning to read people, who'd survived decades of financial struggle, and who'd been taught by her wise husband to question everyone's motives. If you want to learn how to protect yourself and your family from financial predators like Lucas, make sure to subscribe for more stories about recognizing red flags and staying safe. And let me ask you, have you ever kept a secret that ended up protecting someone you love? Today, Abigail and I use our resources to help other families avoid the trap we almost fell into. We learn that the best defense against predators isn't having money, it's having wisdom, patience, and the courage to trust your instincts, even when everyone tells you you're wrong. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and share with others so they can learn too. See you in our next video.